Welcome everybody to the unfortunately named Angry Sun Zone. This weekend has been probably the hottest weekend in recallable memory
ever
for us.
Hottest weekend I think ever that I've been alive, to be honest.
It's so hot my sandals have become unglued.
And yeah, it's unprecedented heat. Calls for an unprecedented podcast.
That's right.
I'm Santo. We got Alex with us.
That's me.
And we got Sean as well.
Hello.
And today we are going to be talking about underrated games, overrated games, and guilty pleasures. So the heat of this weekend will only be matched by the heat of these takes on these potentially controversial games. So what I did is that I went through a bunch of online top 10s, top 20s, top 50s on different overrated and underrated games. And there were a few games that kept popping up on these lists that I thought we should talk about as, the general consensus. Before we get into that, I just want to have a quick aside to the people that are writing these lists. Pretty much all of the examples, with very few exception, came from the 360 era onwards. There's very little writing about overrated, underrated games of times previous to that, with one extremely notable exception. And two, especially, this is mostly the overrated list, but the people that are writing these lists are freaking
Are they children?
They're freaking like goons or something, because they're just written like the people that like these games. They're just calling them names and shit. It's uncalled for. If you don't like something, there's no reason to go so overboard on them. But anyways,
Angry Sun Zone, the zone of reasonable takes and enjoyment for everyone.
Level-headed discussion. We're not going to result to ad hominem attacks here.
The sun might be angry, but we are placated in our approach.
So let's start with
I don't feel like placated is the right word there. Moving on.
Yeah. Let's start with the overrated games, and I want to start with one that we brought up extremely briefly earlier and decided, no, let's talk about this later. Bioshock.
Bioshock is a terrible game, and I stand by it.
A lot of people adore Bioshock and think this is one of the best games in modern memory. So, Alex, why is it terrible?
So, I have a few problems with Bioshock, to be honest. One of the problems I have with Bioshock is that, frankly, if I want to boil it down in one word, the word is boring. Bioshock is a boring game. The combat is slow, the combat is clunky, and also the game unnecessarily pads health bars to a very high level, and then it has this mechanic where every time you die, it doesn't actually get rid of enemies. In fact, It also doesn't even regenerate the enemy's health. All the enemies stay dead, or they stay damaged. And so you end up, if you do end up in an area where the game becomes a bit more challenging, you just end up dying, going back, picking away at the health bars, and then repeating that for a while. Which is just it's a terribly boring way to play your game.
I think you meant in an area where the game becomes more difficult.
Yeah.
Because
I love it.
Because just if there's no real penalty for failure, then how is that challenging?
Yeah, and
that's
also
really dumb.
The game intentionally makes fights just slow with health bars on many enemies that are just they're unnecessarily large, and it's not even fun. It's not an interesting boss fight where there's a lot of different moves and telegraphed attacks, and it changes up at different health levels. It's just the same. It's just the same thing over and over. And so the combat, I find the combat incredibly boring, partly because of this enemy thing, but also partly because just the weapons themselves they're not fun to use.
I thought you could shoot bees in that game.
Okay, some of the special power-ups are kind of cool. They still have the same problems where it just they don't feel satisfying to use. They don't feel like they hit hard and take enemies out, which I feel is like an important thing. Like every single weapon in the game feels weak. There's a flamethrower in the game, and the flamethrower is incredibly unsatisfying to use, and that should not be the case. Okay, if you have a game and the flamethrower is not fun to play with, I'm not saying it has to be a good weapon. It needs to be a fun weapon. How did they mess that up? Anyway, so the combat's clunky. I don't like the combat, and then the movement is super clunky. It's slow, and I think they were going for this. Like they were trying to go for a vibe of like, oh, everything's just like kind of big and beefy and methodical but powerful. But to me it just falls out as everything is boring. Everything in this game takes way longer than it should. It's way too slow paced for the type of game it is, because it's a third person first person shooter, basically. And the story doesn't make up for it.
That's what I was going to ask, because a lot of people do like it for the story and atmosphere.
Yes, the story's, it's just kind of, it unfolds, I would say, a bit slowly as well. But my main, the story isn't bad, honestly. It's fine. I didn't like the voice acting though. I feel like the voice actors did a pretty bad job. A lot of the voice again, and this is part of it. I feel like they were probably going for this vibe where they wanted a lot of voice actors to feel like they had, just like powerful resonant voices, and instead everyone just kind of sounds disinterested. like seriously. Okay. That's what I got. That's what I felt. I was like, man, every voice actor they hire just sounds like they're phoning it in because they're just sort of like tired or something. Like, it was weird. And then now the atmosphere. So what I will say is that the game visually has great art direction. That's the one thing that I think that I actually do agree about Bioshock, is that it is a beautiful game to look at, especially for its time. The weapons, especially the plasmids, some of the plasmids, they are visually very cool and very striking. Again, you can shoot bees. That's really cool. That's a cool effect.
Bees?
You got lightning hands and stuff like that. Like, those are cool, but just because a game has a visually striking aesthetic does not negate all the other things that you need. Namely, it needs to be fun to move around, it needs to be fun to play, fun to combat, and it just didn't have any of those.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Also, I think actually it definitely fell prey a little bit to one of the common pitfalls of that era, which was that everything was too dark. The atmosphere was trying to be really moody, and so a lot of areas were poorly lit with like spotlighting or spotlit items or
point lights.
Bloom. There was a lot of it'd be like a dark room with like bloom lighting on like specific objects and stuff, which is trying to go for that
doom and bloom aesthetic.
Yeah, doom and bloom, sure. So, like, it looked cool, but that's about the only thing I actually liked about it, and that wasn't enough. I didn't even finish the game because I was just bored.
I also had a similar experience with Bioshock. I started watching a playthrough of it, and I was fascinated by, like you're saying, the atmosphere and the visuals of the game. And I tried it, and I made it past the opening sequence. And without... I think you articulated it much better than I did, but unknown forces made me feel disinterested in the game quite quickly, and I I couldn't even get back into watching the playthrough of it. I've seen a few cool clips from each of the Bioshock games, but have never had enough traction to be able to play it through to the first game through to its entirety. For me, I also found, I think it was, for me, mostly, I would say the number one thing, and I would agree with you there, is the pacing of the game. It didn't fit with my style, personally. I did, what actually kind of hooked me into trying out the game was the elements of the plasmids, but I didn't really even get that far to explore that very much, and so I can't say very much about it. But, I am unable to give it a thumb.
Yeah. Like, not liking a game enough that you don't play very much of it is totally valid in my opinion. Some people are like, oh, well, you didn't get to the good parts. Like, if I slogged through so much of the bad parts and didn't want to continue, then the game's bad. One game that happened to me with that I suppose I would consider overrated is Undertale. Now, Undertale is this internet darling of a video game that, like, harkens back to, like, Earthbound's probably the best comparison you can give for it, where, and with a little bit of, like, almost Shin Megami Tensei stuff of where in the fights you can either fight the enemies in this little bullet hell minigames, or you can talk to the enemies, and then eventually, you know, have mercy on them, and then you win the fight without actually killing them. But the first parts of the game are these just like really bad puzzle sequences that are just not enjoyable, and the first few enemies that you encounter are the quote-unquote combat system is novel, but I felt like it really outstayed its welcome within the first, hour of the game or something like that, which is a real bad sign. And so I never got to the parts that were actually considered, the good parts of the game. And I later found out that that first section of the game was actually like the developer behind it released that part of the game as like an early teaser or whatever, and then I ended up taking the game in a fairly different direction from then on, but still kept in that early part. It's like, well, come on, you should have gone back and like fixed up that early part a bit with the feedback that you got. Don't just use the feedback that you got to make the rest of the game better. Apply it to the part that you just made. So I ended up not liking it, even though I know there's a fair amount of people that absolutely love that game. And the later parts of it do sound like something that I'd be into, but the early part was just so off-putting that I just couldn't deal with it.
Yeah, I think because the whole thing with Undertale is that you, instead of dying, it goes through multiple branching paths, right? Or is that?
I don't know about that.
I thought that was
there are multiple paths that you can take in the game, and the thing about Undertale is that it's a very it's a game that knows it's a game.
Yeah, I haven't actually played it, though. I've heard it's really good.
Yeah. I too have not played it.
Yeah, like it does a lot of stuff that like the game, like for example, if you do stuff in the game and then you think, oh, I didn't like how that turned out, let me quit and reload past save. It knows that you did that. For example, like kind of like a Mr. Rossetti type thing. And there's a lot of stuff where you can play as like a pacifist run or a run where you murder everything, and then like how you complete the battles changes how a lot of the game ends up playing out. So again, a lot of really interesting concepts and apparently a lot of great humor later on, but just never got to it.
Yeah, I mean that's a big challenge, right? You have to intro your game well. If you start off weak, a lot of people are just going to stop playing.
Mm-hmm. Now, a game that showed up on a lot of lists that I don't think any of us here have played are the various God of War games.
I haven't played a single one.
Me neither.
I have heard vicariously about this game. It appears to be a game excellent for beginners. One of my friends and she's never really gotten into video games before, got a PS4, and was soul searching for what games she could dive into to learn about video games and how they work, and stumbled across the God of War games. And her one feedback was, wow, this is actually fun. Now, there is a caveat. I asked her how she was experiencing this game, and it consisted of watching playthroughs and then imitating what she learned through those playthroughs. However, she said it actually was a blast to go execute what she was absorbing.
Fair play.
Yeah.
I mean, I have heard derogatorily that God of War is basically just one long QuickTime cutscene, like one long cutscene with QuickTime events. But
There's a lot of games like that.
Yes. Tomb Raider.
Yeah. Also, Asura's Wrath. Yeah, that's one that I think there's a few on here that I think people just like list as overrated because they sell really well, and it comes down to how you define overrated. So like, do people think the game is like amazing when it's not, or do a lot of people like a game when perhaps it's quote unquote undeserving of that attention? Like, I saw a lot of people talking about various Call of Duty games and Halo games as being overrated, and like, come on, that's just not true. Like, they're exceptionally competently made shooters.
Yeah, I mean, like, I used to rag on Halo a bit more when I was younger, mostly because I generally play shooters on PC. And the thing about Halo is that Halo basically brought concepts that were already established in PC shooters and successfully translated some of those concepts to a console shooter in a way that hadn't really been quite done before. And that was actually like, and you can look at that in one of two ways. You can look at it as being derivative, or you can look at it as actually like breaking new ground. And I think that it's that perspective that like trips people up. This with Halo in particular, just because that's what I'm thinking about that more familiarly. Is that it's like say for example, like there's a lot of story that's communicated through cutscenes that do not take control away from the player in Halo. Now, this of course, as a technique, was probably popularized the most by Half-Life, but console shooters hadn't really been doing it so much before Halo. And then Halo's also just well made.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that Halo isn't necessarily like shattering the genre with entirely new techniques. It's just like doing a whole grab bag of basically everything, and pretty much everything in it is at the very least like well done.
Yeah, because like,
and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Not every game needs to like bring groundbreaking new mechanics into the genre.
Exactly.
Is it even possible at this maturity level of the video games industry to truly bring in new...
Yes.
It absolutely...
The Battle Royale games came up in the last couple of years, and that was something that didn't exist in the mainstream before that.
I concede the point. Yeah.
Like, you can absolutely do new things. But yeah, that's to your point, Alex, of just like, yeah, it does so many things just like, well, it doesn't... And that's why it's so successful, and Call of Duty as well, is that these games, if they do a lot of things good, that'll appeal to a wide audience. A lot of people are going to like them. That doesn't make them overrated, just because they don't, they aren't just like the pinnacle of like the best shooting ever.
Yeah.
Even because it's the most popular shooter ever.
Yeah. I'd see, if we wanted to like make a comparison across media, like if you look at the Marvel movie cinematic universe, a lot of film people will basically give the Marvel Cinematic Universe a bunch of critique and say, "Oh, these movies aren't that good. Like they're overrated. Like they're so popular. They're not worthy of all this money they're making." It's like, well, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is extraordinarily. It has an extraordinarily high baseline of execution in all of the films. I don't think there's any other
even though all the films are the same.
Yes, they are. The films are
all the films are the same, but hey, guess what? They're fun.
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, but you know what?
I ain't
They
above
have a formula. The formula works. They execute the formula consistently, and that is more than most other Hollywood blockbusters can say. Like,
True.
Agreed.
and a lot of people don't like that, and they give it shit. But at the same time, I mean, there's a place for that.
Yeah. Like, let me put it this way. One of the reasons why, like, you would like an art, like, an art school, like, film or something like that, is because it was on an art school. But if you give, like, an auteur an infinite budget, they're going to churn out something that's probably not going to be as good as what they did with Limitations. Which, I'm saying that mostly as a segue to Metal Gear Solid 4. Yeah, I saw Metal Gear Solid 4 on a lot of lists, and I mean, I've only played the first and the fourth Metal Gear Solid game in any capacity. And I kind of liked the first one, but I was also playing it a fairly long time ago. When I was playing 4, I bounced off it pretty hard. The story is bonkers in a way that defies explanation.
Yeah, okay, so, like, yeah, I mean, Hideo Kojima is, I would say, the closest thing to just, like, a crazy film auteur that the video game industry has, who has been given, essentially, an unlimited budget for some of his more recent works. Now, I'm kind of with you. I liked Metal Gear Solid, okay? Metal Gear Solid is a good game. It's a bit dated, I will say. I didn't play it.
It's more than a bit dated, but yeah.
I played it when I didn't play it when it came out, and I played it a bit later, and even at the time, I was like, yeah, it's a bit clunky, but like the ideas are good. Like, the execution for its time was actually quite well done. Like, it's a good game. I've played some Death Stranding.
Oh dear.
And Death Stranding, so...
Nobody thinks that game's overrated.
Yeah, but so...
I've played some Phantom Pain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Hideo Kojima's recent works, because he's now so well known and people give him so much money for to make whatever he wants, like, it's not good. It's too much. It's too damn much, and it really lacks focus. Like, Death Stranding is insane. The game is insane. Like, it veers between, like, 30 to 60 minute cutscenes with a couple QuickTime events to just, like, literally a walking simulator. Literally. Like, and actually, it's a really cool walking simulator, because you have to, like, use the sticks and use the levers to walk.
Like, there's one thing that Kojima's games are good for. It's weird little dumb mechanics.
Yeah,
that
like,
are peppered in everywhere.
like, Sean,
like, you have to balance your loads.
Yeah, like, you're talking about, like, oh, can you even do anything new? You can. Death Stranding made walking a challenging video game mechanic in a way that no other game has.
Yep.
Is it fun to play? It's something to play. I'm not sure if fun is the right word, though. It's more like being in awe that a madman actually made this.
That's a powerful feeling sometimes.
It is. It is. Okay, I'm gonna be honest. I do not regret the time I have spent with Death Stranding. It is an incredible piece of art. I don't know that it's a game. It's not a movie, but I don't know that it's a game either. I think it's funny, actually. Like, I was playing it with my family a little bit, and my mom thought that she heard it was like an interactive movie, and she actually was interested in that.
Mm-hmm. Oh dear.
And yeah, and of course you get into, like, the weird baby the weird like engineered
baby
tube used as like a tool. A lot of just strange. Anyway, but yeah, like I think it's more like an interactive pseudo cinematic experience.
I mean, you could make Norman Reedus drink a Monster Energy. That's pretty good.
Yeah,
that's useful. That's a useful ability to have on hand. To watch a digital facsimile of Norman Reedus slam a mountain.
Yeah, it's also got way. It's also like way. Yeah, it's.
He also slams a mountain in that game if you jump off stuff.
Yeah, it's way heavy-handed with like the most like ridiculous social commentary.
Oh,
constantly.
Oh, Kojima has like 50-pound hands. He is the most heavy-handed director in video games. Holy crap! Now, Sean, I want to hear about the Phantom Pain because that's a really interesting Kojima game because it doesn't have nearly as much. It's not nearly as bogged down by the story as a lot of his other games are.
Well, let me tell you something
about gameplay with that game.
Let me tell you something about the story. Is that occasionally there are breaks for chapters. And thanks to those breaks, I've learned that every chapter in the game was directed by Kojima, produced by Kojima. Every name in the credits is Kojima, and it is fantastic. It made me definitely laugh.
Yeah.
The game was quite open world, a little bit more than like it. It went beyond even that of say GTA, and it was interesting because this was actually my first introduction to the Metal Gear series. And,
so you gravitated towards playing as Snake in Smash Bros. Without having played a Metal Gear game.
That's right.
That's pretty interesting.
It was just about the bullshit.
Truly. But, yeah, so actually before playing as Snake in Smash Bros., I'd seen clips from the various games. Which seemed pretty interesting, and I wasn't sure where to start, and so hilariously I started with 5 because I heard strange things about 4. Let me tell you, it was also a weird game. The plot made me wonder what kind of drugs that Kojima could have been possibly on when he was writing some of the plot, and there was definitely some elements that seemed very gratuitous, such as quiet.
You don't have to say more than that.
Very gratuitous.
Yes.
Ultimately, I left that game feeling like, based off of all the clips I had ever watched before and the story as I knew it so far, I felt like I could glean a little bit into Kojima's brain, which was a little bit like that scene in Indiana Jones where the poor lady says she wants to learn everything and she learns too much and gets eviscerated by the aliens. I felt my brain slowly melting as I got towards the end of the game. Now, fighting... And there was always just some elements that came into that game that made me be like, whoa! Like fighting the giant Metal Gear walkers. That always felt quite overwhelming. And the fact that it was so open world that you could do quite game-breaking things, which for me... I would actually just replay the same mission over and over again with the purpose of seeing if I could... fuck with the storyline there and do things that weren't intended, usually just ending up and dying. But yeah, Metal Gear Solid seemed like a solid game. The one thing that I actually did do is I went back and I played, not the Phantom Pain, but Ground Zeroes, I think it was called.
Yeah. The little teaser they put out.
Yeah, and that was also pretty cool. It felt like a great introduction to the game. And tied in a shocking plot point from one game to the next. And also introduced me to the zany characters and strange organizations that this game and Kojima's universe seems to be occupied by. My favorite elements were that there's, the Fox's organization, or Fox organization, and then there's XOF, which just, is like the film. And that the duality elements truly made me feel... I actually felt like I was being beaten by a film theory textbook sometimes when I was watching it, where I'd go, I've watched, or I've learned about this in my film studies course. Why do I feel like I'm swallowing the textbook while I'm playing this game? So Definitely.
Because Kojima wants to make movies, damn it.
I get that feeling for sure. But, yeah.
And, yeah, one thing that I want to say here is that, like, I hope this doesn't come off as us, like, slagging off Kojima. I'm glad that he's doing what he's doing. Like,
Kojima's
we
amazing.
need, like, the video game industry needs, like, a pretentious auteur type.
Yeah,
to just be crazy.
I wish there was more than one.
And,
yeah, well,
like I can't there's not even I can't think of any other person who's like in the same class as Kojima.
Not in the same class. There's some people that are just like a couple like tiers below him in terms of just like,
if I go like a couple tiers below, I can think like maybe Jonathan Blow.
Like David Cage, but he makes terrible games and doesn't know how to write.
Honestly, I didn't like Braid either.
To convey how I feel about Kojima, there's this one scene in Westworld where, and if you haven't seen Westworld, then this might not make a lot of sense, but the creator of Westworld is played by Anthony Hopkins, and he really dials up his Hannibal-like mannerisms as he's playing the absolute insane, batshit crazy creator of this theme park, full of, androids who are trying to give you a good time when you go there, consisting of murder, violence, and gratuitous plot points. And in a way, it felt as though Kojima was a very much Ford-like character, and there's this one scene where Ford is talking to the moneymen who are paying for this place, and their spokesperson who's talking to him, and he very vaguely, well, actually, I'm gonna back that up there, very overtly threatens her in the middle of this theme park, and she, at that point, she has to whip out a cigarette because she realizes how ingrained he is into this whole scenario. And I feel like that's the one thing that I'll note about Metal Gear Solid 5, is that a lot of people were commenting that it felt as though the game was unfinished because of a breakdown between Konami and Kojima. And I feel like that exact conversation between the moneymen and Kojima must have happened and probably gone a similar way, except that it didn't turn out in Kojima's favor, unfortunately. I wish it had. I would have loved to see the game as he fully intended it.
Yeah. He's done well for himself since. So
he has.
He made Death Stranding.
He found a new baby daddy in Sony, so...
Yes!
Yeah, but more to your point, like, yeah, it sounds like we're slagging on him. It's not that I think Kojima is, like, a bad director or anything like that. It's that, like, as we got onto this in the first place, it's that I think sometimes someone like Kojima will make better games with more oversight.
Yeah.
It's kind of like how Star Wars, like the first trilogy, the original trilogy of Star Wars was much better because George Lucas actually had a lot of oversight and a lot of editing was done on what he wanted. And that, in hindsight, was what led to the original Star Wars trilogy being so much better than the prequel trilogy, where Lucas had almost total creative control.
Scary things happened in the in between episodes 1 to 3.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like to get these really like good kind of out there innovative ideas, it requires a certain kind of personality, and they're not all going to be winners. And if you don't have and so it seems like I feel like it's almost like the ideal like team, like the ideal is probably to be a good team of like someone like Kojima with someone like an auteur, and then someone that works with them, and they work together well and like respect each other. But it seems like that's a difficult partnership for any creative partnership like that. It's difficult to sustain. And maybe it's out there and we just don't see it as well, because I mean there's so many there's so many,
little transparency in the video game industry.
Yeah, there's so many games where
stuff.
There's so many games or studios where we see like the success, but we don't really know how it goes on, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've been talking about some Supergiant games a lot on previous episodes.
They're actually very out there with how they do stuff. They shot multiple documentaries about the makings of their games.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I did not know that.
You should check out No Clip, which is a documentary series that looks at how games are made.
Oh,
basically,
cool.
that and they've done a lot of different projects, and a lot of them are very interesting.
Because I'd love to learn more about their creative process, because it seems like they're consistently good output that is getting perhaps better in some ways over time, which is challenging. Not a lot of studios manage that.
It helps that a lot of the people that are there are veterans of the industry in one way or another. But yeah, we could maybe go into the inner workings of Supergiant another time. Now, Sean, you brought up a series that one game in particular I saw a lot of on these lists, which was GTA 4. A lot of people think Grand Theft Auto 4 is overrated, and
how could you say that, cousin? We went bowling together.
Ah, yes.
We controlled terribly together. Yeah, and GTA 4 is like a really weird one, because I feel like the public consciousness about this game has been like really up and down. Like, sure, like critically it was extremely well received, and it was a GTA game, so it sold well. But I remember, at least at the time, like talking with people I knew, it was definitely like a little bit of a disappointment in some ways, because it took that zany tone of all the previous games and really lessened it for the main storyline, but still kept like all of the like American culture satire in there in full force. Like, it still had all those radio stations, like the freaking TV shows.
The TV stations
were hilarious.
The TV stations in GTA 4 were amazing.
Yeah, so it was like, it had that weird dichotomy that I think like made a very divisive game, but I don't think I would call it overrated.
Well, I remember a lot of people also were upset that it didn't have a new area, right? Because it but yeah,
it did. Okay, if you're talking about landmass, like, fuck you, like, come on, like the tone of everything was completely different. Like, it was so much darker and grittier that, like, yes, it's the same geometry perhaps, but it's a completely different atmosphere.
Yeah, I didn't personally find that to be much of an issue myself, but I do remember that was a complaint that some people had at the time. But yeah, I think it really got overshadowed by GTA 5 a lot in the public consciousness, which, remember, is already quite an old game now. GTA 5 is...
What are you talking about? They're still releasing it for the current generations of consoles.
Yeah, they've kept GTA 5 alive for a long time.
It's because it makes billions of dollars.
It prints money.
Yep, they literally sell you in-game money, and but yeah, so like I didn't really like GTA 4 just because like I was the person driving like golf carts into shit and making stuff explode in Vice City. Like, that's the game I wanted.
Yeah.
And just like how everything controlled in that game was so
frustrating.
Yes, I'll use the term grounded to be nice, but yes, frustrating.
I remember.
I recall the cars weird.
Like, they controlled a bit more like cars, which, I mean...
Well, see, no. Okay, now here was the problem. Okay, is that they controlled more like cars in a simulation game would, in all the frustrating ways, but they still didn't control like an actual car would in a simulation game. And so it was like it managed to somehow take the worst parts of simulation driving and the worst parts of arcade driving and mash them together. I don't know how they managed to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I do recall GTA 4 had one of the most frustrating driving. Some of the most frustrating driving of any that I've played.
I think one of the things that I think people have praised about GTA 4 though is the story and like how it did handle like that character, like the Nico character, and like, you know, some stuff with like immigration and shit like that.
It's funny.
But,
it's funny,
I mean,
actually.
That's not what I didn't come to
I was literally actually
for the story.
I was just talking with someone the other day, and he was like, "Man, I love GTA 4. I feel like that's exactly what's going on in New York City in the gang underworld." And I'm like, maybe, I don't know. But it seemed more believable than something like Vice City.
Yeah. We don't need more things about Italian Americans rising through the crime ranks. Yeah, we need more stories like that. Fuck.
More stories about the Serbians. I think they were Serbian, or I can't remember.
In GTA 4, that sounds correct. That either sounds correct and is correct, or sounds correct and I'm a massive racist. So we'll just move on to another Rockstar game that I saw on all of these lists, and one that I've been meaning to play forever, because it does sound up my alley. Oh, sorry.
I do find it interesting that so, wait, people were saying GTA 4 is overrated?
Yes.
It's funny, because I feel like
it got perfect scores when it was released by critics. I think that it critically overrated. Is what I think people.
I had a lot of people complained about the driving and various nitpicks. And
yeah, a lot of random people did, but critically the game did amazing. But anyways, another overrated Rockstar game people talk about is LA Noire.
I never got around to playing that.
Yeah, same, and I really want to.
I've heard good things about it, but likewise, I have not played that one yet.
The only thing I know is that you press X to doubt.
All right, so I'm gonna press X right now. I doubt that game's overrated, but let's talk about another one. So I saw a lot of people saying that the Mortal Kombat games are overrated, and this was some of the height of just the what are you doing with your life writing this stuff? Where people were just talking about how those games are only popular because of the violence. Yes they are. Yeah. So what? Who cares? It's not. Yeah, especially the earlier games. They're not deep, strategic and balanced fighting games. They're just fun gore fest.
Ridiculous. Yeah.
You uppercut a dude into some spikes, and then some guy from the side pops out and says "Dusty," and it's amazing. Who gives a shit?
And then they made a movie.
They've made multiple movies. Yeah.
So good.
And the newer Mortal Kombat games, by all accounts, are pretty damn good fighting games too. So that one just struck me a weird one and I wouldn't have even mentioned it if I only saw one person with that take, but I saw multiple people with that take. So I don't know what's going on there.
You heard it here. Stop having that take.
Only good takes, Assassin's Creed is overrated, and I stand fucking by that. I think that, yes, I've only played 2, but I think that game controlled so poorly, I don't understand how anybody liked those games.
I remember my number one way of dying, my top 2 ways of dying was scaling a building and messing something up terribly, or trying to dive in a hay bale and whipping that and splattering to my death beside it.
I feel like one of the reasons that Assassin's Creed games have been so especially initially, were so popular, is because going back to how we've talked about open world games before, and just movement. I actually thought that the movement was fun, and the movement, at the very least, was interesting. The controls may not have been perfect, but I can't really think of any other open world games off the top of my head where your main mode of traversing the area is to traverse buildings and basically parkour your way around. I can think of games where you do that, but they're not open world games.
Right.
Mirror's Edge or Prince of Persia. I feel like Assassin's Creed early on essentially was trying to be open world Prince of Persia, and I think it kind of got there. Of course, later games totally changed the setting up, and now it seems there's an Assassin's Creed game for every possible historical setting you can think of.
Except Japanese history. They haven't gotten around to that yet.
I can't wait till they do the future.
That's what everything was pointing to. Everything was pointing to a modern day Assassin's Creed game, and then they just dropped that storyline completely. There's
you can go from Prince of Persia, open world Prince of Persia, to open world Mirror's Edge.
So there's one more game that I saw on all this, and this is the most overrated video game ever, I think, and it's Final Fantasy VII.
Okay, 100% agree.
So
way overrated.
I agree that it's overrated. However, I still think it's a great game.
It is a good game. I don't know. I sunk a lot of hours into that game, and I probably only got a third of the way in.
That's value. But like that, I think everything with that game just comes down to when it was released. That is why it is overrated. Because that game was one of the first examples, especially on a console, of a game that just felt huge.
Yeah.
So like,
I think
it's
that was
completely natural.
That was probably my problem with it. Actually, I didn't play it when it came out. I played it later. Mm-hmm. By the time things had kind of moved on a little bit in both gaming in general and in RPGs specifically, and so I was spoiled. I was spoiled on newer things by the time I got around to actually playing Final Fantasy VII. I loved the story. The story was cool. I can't remember why I stopped playing, to be honest. I think it was just too big.
Yeah. It's entirely possible you got stuck on a boss or something like that. That's generally when I quit most RPGs. Yeah. I get stuck on a boss, say, that's it. I'm going to a different one. There's so many I could possibly play right now.
And you forget.
The stickiest of bosses.
Yeah. Yeah. I played Final Fantasy VII like fairly recently. I played it in 2019.
Yeah.
And I still thought it was a great game. But yeah, it's still the most overrated game ever.
I think
because people put that game on a that's the difference between a lot of games that I might think are overrated and Final Fantasy VII is that when I think about an overrated game, it's something that people put on a pedestal that doesn't deserve to be there. I think that Final Fantasy VII actually deserves to be on the pedestal that's put on, but maybe a smaller pedestal.
Yeah. Well, I think with Final Fantasy VII, a lot of people they fell in love with it because of the time that they played it, and then it gets clouded with nostalgia, which I am totally guilty of as well. What's that?
Clouded, nice.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, but yeah, if you don't have nostalgia for Final Fantasy VII, I think it's definitely not the best RPG of all time.
Oh no, it's not. Now,
actually, okay, I brought this up briefly, but like I just want to talk about it. Mirror's Edge. This is funny because I feel like opinions have flip-flopped on this because I remember it was really, really, really anticipated, and I feel like it scored well when it came out, and people thought it was overrated, and then now I think maybe it's actually underrated.
So we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here, but Mirror's Edge is the game that I saw on the most underrated lists.
Really?
Yes.
Because when it came out, everyone said it was overrated.
And let's talk about it now and then. Weave this narrative we got going here. So, I think Mirror's Edge was part of an initiative by EA to make new properties. Dead Space was also in that initiative.
Yep.
And Mirror's Edge was one of the prime examples of why EA stopped doing that. Because it was critically well received, but it didn't sell very well. It didn't sell to their expectations, I believe. So, like...
Yeah, and I don't even think it sold that poorly. It's just that, given the amount of money and time they spent on it, it just didn't have quite enough return.
Yeah. And another thing is that, like, I think, like, the promise of a first-person parkour game, that sounds so cool. And I haven't actually played Mirror's Edge, so this is just, like, hearsay, really. But... like, it maybe was like an okay first attempt, but it definitely wasn't like crazy awesome.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Mirror's Edge, I liked Mirror's Edge. I thought Mirror's Edge was a fun game, but it definitely had some problems. One of the biggest problems was actually just the smoothness. It was kind of clunky when you were transitioning into combat. Because that was the weird thing about Mirror's Edge, is that it was almost two games at once. Because playing the game when you're just parkouring around and traversing the maps has a certain play style and feel, and then enemies show up, and then you have to shoot the enemies or take them out in hand-to-hand combat. But the combat is it's a very different way of playing the game, and especially sometimes the transition between the two is jarring and not well handled. I don't think that it's a problem that couldn't be fixed, and in fact, I believe Mirror's Edge 2 handled a bit better.
Mm-hmm. But nobody bought that either. Like
that's the thing. I think Mirror's Edge was a great first attempt at not just a new property, but a relatively underexplored genre. Whereas, and then Mirror's Edge 2 improved upon it. But yeah, I think it's just not a particularly lucrative genre for the amount of money that EA spent making those games.
I wonder if we'll ever see Mirror's Edge in VR, Nausea Edition.
Mirror's Edge, Mirror's Edge could be super cool in VR.
They might have done something like that. I don't know. EA did.
Mirror's Edge
EA's messed around with VR a lot.
Mirror's Edge,
Star Wars shit. But.
I'll say this, and actually, I wonder because there's the Vader VR games.
Yeah.
That I've played.
And Star Wars Squadrons in VR is also apparently...
What I'll say is that there are some techniques that they had used in the Star Wars Vader VR game that would be perfect in Mirror's Edge. Because, they have you really, just interacting with the geometry of the level to traverse it, which is what Mirror's Edge is all about. Mm-hmm. Especially if you took those same mechanics from those Star Wars games and kind of just tried to speed them up and maybe make the hit recognition a bit smoother, although that might be difficult with VR. But I feel like there's something there that you could make a really fun game out of in VR. I feel like they've released press releases where they're like, we're thinking about making VR Mirror's Edge or something. Mm-hmm. It sounds like something that I remember reading about, experimental Mirror's Edge VR test setups that they maybe had, but
that could definitely be cool.
It seems actually like the perfect genre. Mm-hmm. Parkouring, first person parkour. That sounds like a VR game. Mm-hmm. That would be really fun. So.
And yeah, I think.
And then, it's funny because now that I think about it, I think that in VR you could actually make the transition between the parkour elements and the combat elements more smooth than it was on mouse and keyboard, which I played on.
You heard it here first. Mirror's Edge VR coming to a VR platform near
Coming
you.
to no platforms ever because EA just doesn't.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the main reasons why Mirror's Edge shows up on so many underrated lists, is that the game itself could possibly be underrated, but that the idea of Mirror's Edge is really what's underrated, which is this big AAA studio taking a risk for once and putting resources behind a new, interesting project.
Yeah.
People are probably they want to call Mirror's Edge underrated just because of that fact. So let's dovetail back into Overrated for a second. That's all the games that I had that popped up on a lot of lists for Overrated. Any examples that you guys have of overrated games, personally? I got one that I can start with.
Go for it.
And that's Gone Home.
Gone Home.
I haven't played that one.
Yeah, so Gone Home is this game that, if you look at it on the store or whatever, it's got this kind of eerie-looking font on this eerie-looking house, and the screenshots are all fairly dark, and it's this first-person game. And so you'd probably go into it thinking it's this, very spooky experience of exploring this abandoned house and then jump scares or whatever. But it's not. You're going through this house as this family member that's shown up after like a long period of time or something like that. And you're basically just exploring this house and kind of exploring the story of this family that lives in this house that you're related to. So parts of it don't actually make sense to me, but it's like this like all of this information shouldn't be new to this person clearly, but you're still going around discovering it. So I don't know. Yeah, it basically just it's the game that like it's the first example of the quote unquote walking simulator, where all you're doing in the game is walking around, looking around at these various things, hearing these voiceovers of these notes left by your sister about how like she met like a new friend, how cool they are, and then various problems that the family's having and that they're dealing with and all that stuff. And critically, the game like critically adored. Like people love this game, the critics, and I don't use the whole not a game thing very often, and this is still a game, but it's bordering very close to just not being a game. It's as close as it's like an interactive story, but I don't think that the interaction A helps the story, and B I don't even think that it's a great story. It's a game that just like I don't see why people think it's so great. I don't know.
Yeah, something I do notice is that, and I wish this weren't the case, but video game stories, frankly, a lot of them just aren't that great.
Yeah.
And
I agree.
And because of that, as soon as something comes in with even a half decent story, if it's in a video game, suddenly it is regarded way better than it would be if the same story were in a different medium.
Yeah.
Right.
And the frustrating thing about that,
and I wish that we had more good stories in games so that we could
And the frustrating thing about that to me is that a lot of people, I feel like, look down on stuff like visual novels, for example, and even like dating sims, and those quote-unquote genres of quote-unquote games are way more story-based, and a lot of the times, like, I've read a few visual novels that have had excellent stories, or like games that are mostly visual novels with light game elements, and those barely get talked about, but then people, play Bioshock and love its story for some reason. I don't get it.
I have no idea why people love Bioshock's story. It makes no sense to me. Seemed like mediocre at best.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm willing to give a game accolades for a story. Like, we've talked about how my favorite game ever is Homeworld, and I love Homeworld's story. I especially love Homeworld's voice acting, which is amazing, and I'm not going to budge on that, and really helps the story. But if I'm being honest, the story isn't particularly... It's the presentation of the story that's done well.
Like, the story is good, but the plot isn't.
The plot's fine. The plot's not bad.
The plot's not bad, but the plot's not amazing. Yeah.
No, it's not like it's honestly it is an extremely straightforward standard sci-fi plot.
Yeah.
Like if it were a science fiction novel, it would not be notable at all. But because it's a video game, I give it higher marks than I would otherwise if that same story was in a different medium. And then also, but then where it gets dicey though is like where you have these games that they're in this weird interactive story almost kind of category of game, and that's where things get dicey because now obviously there is more focus on the story, and we end up in this weird zone where, like, whereas Homeworld is an RTS with a good story, if you have a almost non-game with a good story by video game standards that is still a mediocre story if it were an actual novel, for example. We're in this weird middle ground where you're basically just reading. You might have a game where you're basically just reading a story, and yet it's held to video game standards and then gets called exceptional, even though it's not a game. And that's I think the problem that I have with when these games sometimes get really high accolades, is because it feels almost like it's
cheating.
Yeah, it feels like cheating in a way. It's like if I could write a novel and then get it graded on the video game metrics instead of the novel metrics, even though it's still basically a novel. Like, that's kind of weird. But I don't know. And at the same time, I do like some of those games, right? Like, I think Firewatch is kind of similar. It's good. If I'm being honest, actually, the Penumbra games, like Amnesia and what was before Amnesia? They made. Wait, no, it was Penumbra. Frictional Games is the studio name. God. Frictional Games made Amnesia, Dark Descent, and the Penumbra series of games. And they're horror games, though if I'm being honest, they are actually, in some ways, more similar to the walking simulator category, if you're being really, fine. It's just that the entire atmosphere is horror, and so, even though it's mostly story conveyed through text and audio clips, no one calls it a walking simulator because it's horror themed.
Right.
For me, one overrated game that definitely strikes me is Age of Empires 3.
Okay. Overrated. Okay.
And
I definitely did not like Age of Empires 3 nearly as much as any of the other games.
It felt to me very much like a game that the critics loved because perhaps they were paid to love it.
Oh, come on. I don't think it's that. If anything, they loved it because it said Age of Empires on it.
It was a game of disappointment. After riding the wave of Age of Empires 2 and sinking so many hours into it that my eyes resembled owl eyes, let me tell you that it did not measure up at all to what the critics were saying about it. And it felt as though they were trying much too hard to do something distinctly different with 3, putting it forward to the colonial age, but straying away from the elements, or not focusing enough on the elements that would have made it into the masterpieces that came before it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. They had too many new ideas that felt half-baked and square peg round holy.
Yes.
Than others. Like, for example, Asian mythology is... They try something different with that compared to Age of Empires 2, with, the 3 civilizations that you pick being really different. In Age of Empires 2, there's over 30 different civs that you can pick, and they have fairly minor differences in the grand scheme of things, that because every difference is so minor, that makes the differences actually major in a way. With Age of Mythology, they had 3 different factions that played completely differently from each other. There was the favor as an additional resource, there were the myth units and the gods that you could, and god power, and even something like god powers, which is a completely insane thing to throw in that series.
Yeah,
that still felt better than the freaking home city redeeming those bonuses felt in Age of Empires 3. That just felt off.
It really did. It really, really did.
Mm-hmm.
Another overrated game that I would put on the list is Borderlands.
I 100% agree with you there. Borderlands is a fun multiplayer game. If you play that game single player, it is boring as sin. I don't understand. This is one of the things that I don't understand why people like open world games. I should have brought this up when we talked about it, but I forgot. Which is about Borderlands, is that you have this insane world that you've built with these insane characters and all this zany, off-the-wall humor and attitude to it. Why sit your game in a post-apocalyptic wasteland where there's nothing to do? Like it's completely anachronistic to me.
So that they could show off their glorious loot engine, the game machine.
Yeah, that part on it is great, but if I have to just walk around all this just barren wasteland,
Yeah, that's
to get to enemies to get loot, like if I walk out of the town in Diablo 2, I'm fighting enemies right away. I can't walk 2 screens without finding more stuff to kill and more loot to find.
Let me
It
tell
is
you,
populated.
Yes.
Yeah, that's one thing about the Borderlands games is that's a bit weird. Is that there is a lot of dead space in those games,
And
Dead
yet
Space,
no
another
necromorphs.
Sorry.
and I like Dead Space. I don't think it's
No,
necessarily.
I'm just making a joke because you said Dead Space.
We were playing hard on that.
We talked about it.
Yeah, we talked
Anyway,
about Dead Space.
anyway, the Dead Space 2, it went off the rails. Dead Space 3 I didn't play, and apparently went even more off the rails. But anyway, we already talked about that.
Now,
But yeah, Borderlands, honestly, I think Borderlands is just like, it's the loot collecting, like, multiplayer game of a certain, like, era, and that's really why it's popular. And it's almost like it's popular because it's the multiplayer loot questing game that everyone was playing for a while, and that niche could almost be filled by any, like, reasonably competent game.
Yeah, well, just a short little thing is that, like, it was the first quote-unquote looter shooter, and, like, having a loot game that's also a first-person shooter was very novel at the time. And again, playing it multiplayer, when you have somebody to talk to fill that dead air, like, that was actually a really enjoyable time. But solo, the game just was garbage. I did not want to play it.
Yeah.
I think another thing that disappointed me was that even though you had all of these cool abilities for each character, within their ability tree, that when you progressed to the higher difficulties of the game, it felt like you were very much railroaded into certain abilities being essentially the only playable ones. And then that just evolved into,
Yeah, Borderlands had this problem where everyone basically converges on the same playstyle, and there's no real variety that you can really take in how you play the game.
I think the min-maxer within me likes that but hates itself.
Yeah. It's self-defeating, where I want to play the best that I can be, but then I get railroaded into the one play style.
Yeah.
It's a weird problem to solve, but other games have definitely solved it, so there's no excuse for Borderlands not to have.
Santo, for you, I've got a dangerous question.
Go for it.
So, are the FIFA games overrated?
Okay, so, complicated question. After a point, no, I don't think the FIFA games are overrated because of, like, what they are. Now, FIFA, I do think, like, full disclosure, I worked at EA for about 8 months on FIFA, testing it. And those games are simulation games. They're not arcadey fun sports games. If you're going into those games thinking that they are going to be a fun pick-up-and-play experience, you're wrong. we had a room of 22 people, most of which who had not played FIFA before, and guess what? It was not an enjoyable time for them. Like, picking up and playing that game, like, you get wrecked in ways that you don't even see coming when you're playing against somebody that knows how to play. Like, I'm decent enough with my hands, and I know the rules of soccer, and I was getting wrecked. And I've played 1 or 2 FIFA games in the past. Now, where this gets tricky is that's the modern FIFA games. Now, the older FIFA games, when they were a bit more arcadey style, those were actually pretty fun. Like, I played, I think, FIFA 2000 quite a bit, and that was a great time.
I mean, I love a good arcadey sports game of almost any sport. Mario Soccer,
Strikers is incredible. Yeah,
super fun.
And because you brought up FIFA, I want to, like, dip into underrated games for a second again. One of the games I saw on multiple underrated lists that I fully agree with is NBA Street and FIFA Street. those games that EA put out were like a return to form, where they were just crazy and they were fun. They had elaborate trick systems where you could just like ball juggle in crazy ways.
I can't remember. Did NBA Street, was that one of the ones that had the player with the flaming basketball head in it? Is that a different N64?
Oh, NBA Street was PS2 era. Okay. So if you're thinking of maybe like a weird later NBA Jam game, maybe, or are you thinking of NFL Blitz?
It was an N64 basketball game that was definitely officially NBA. That I remember, it was a very fun arcadey one, and there was one character that he was like I think he might have been like the secret unlock or something, and yeah, it was a dude with a flaming basketball for a head. It was ridiculous, but I loved it.
But these games, like, the stats like mattered in a very real and very like visible way, where when you increased your stats, you could see how that like made your player better in ways that a lot of the newer games, like you increase your shooting stat by 5 out of 100 and you can't really see anything change. It's only when you increase it from like 60 to 90 that you suddenly start seeing changes in that. So yeah, those games were just fun, and I do agree that they're underrated. People don't talk about them nearly as much. FIFA, they actually tried, quote unquote, harkening back to FIFA Street in FIFA 20 and maybe 21, I don't know, I wasn't there that long, with their Volta mode, which was like kind of indoor soccer, like street soccer mode. That was like, 4-on-4, like 3-on-3 to 4-on-4, 5-on-5, whatever. But the problem was it still fit within the FIFA engine, which is Frostbite, by the way, which is bananas.
Wait, really?
EA made all their games use Frostbite.
That's amazing.
All right.
There's an option for there's an option to suicide your character in FIFA.
Is there conquest mode?
Yeah, but this new mode that they really tried really hard to harken back to FIFA Street just felt underbaked because A, time constraints because those games were on a yearly cycle, and B, it was too within the newer FIFA engines that like the tricks were a little bit looser, it felt like, and you could bounce the ball off walls, but it still felt like crap.
Yeah. All right. Some group of games, we'll say, that I feel personally are a bit overrated. It's really just one word, and that word is Bethesda.
Oh, you said it.
I think
you said it, and I agree with you.
I think we talked about this a little bit, maybe, before, but I honestly don't like any of the Bethesda RPGs. Basically since quite a while, actually. Like, Fallout 3, really just, I didn't like it. Oblivion, Skyrim, Like, the other Fallout games, New Vegas, like, these games, to me, they all have fundamentally very similar problems in that I find them slow and boring.
Yep.
And there's all these weird inconveniences that really just turn me off the game. I don't know, like, and it's weird because I can't, it's hard to even point to any one thing. I don't know what it is, but just, and it's almost like all of Bethesda's RPGs these days I just don't like any of them.
Yeah.
I've tried.
They're open world games that, in a way, they want to promote exploration of their open world, but it's just not worth it. Like, you go into the same derelict, burnt out building in Fallout. Yeah. You search through all these lockers that's just got junk, and maybe you'll find one or two things that are useful. And yeah, if you go to like certain areas of the game, you'll find some stuff that's pretty cool, but it ventures into the point where I'm not going to explore that game on its own terms. If I want the cool shit, I'm going to look it up. It's too much of a hassle to try and find that stuff regularly.
I would say, like, if I had to boil it down, it's like nothing feels alive. in these games to me.
Especially not the characters. Every time you go into a conversation, it just, zoom in to their like barely animated model, and they've been using this crap since Oblivion or maybe Morrowind. They're desperate need of engine upgrades. Ugh.
Yeah, but yeah, it's just they're just unfun, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I liked like I've played the 2D Fallout games. Those are good games. It's funny you mentioned the characters. The 2D Fallout games had, I swear, better facial animation than the latest Fallout games do.
We kind of did.
I'm not joking. Like, this is insane. Like, what's wrong? What's wrong that, like, a game that literally doesn't even have a 3D graphics engine made better facial...
Yeah. Not every conversation with a person has to have them talk with their mouth, and they look off to the side like this, and then nod their head a little bit, then look back, and then talk a little bit more, and then do it again.
And like, you know, the funny thing, too, is that, like, sometimes I'll talk to people about, like, some of the issues I have, and they're like, oh, that's easy. All you need to do is install this mod, this mod, this mod, this mod, and this mod. And then it's a good game. And I'm like, if I have to go to all this work to mod the game to turn it into a good game, like, no.
Yeah. And also, what if you're on consoles? If you're on console, you have very little access to those mods unless you want to do crazy shit to your hardware.
Yeah.
So, like, that's not a solution.
Yeah. Also, the other thing is that they're buggy. They're super, super buggy.
And people wave that off as open world jank.
I have no idea why Bethesda gets such a pass. Because I
the
swear...
jank is fun. No, it's not. Guess what? When The Witcher 3 launched, and The Witcher games are insanely open games. Let's forget about Cyberpunk for a moment. Let's just pretend that doesn't exist. But The Witcher 3 had some open world jank and some bugs, but nowhere near on the same level as the amount of quest breaking, hard crashes, and save corruption that the Bethesda RPGs have.
You know why I stopped playing Fallout 3? It's because I lost all my save data for no reason, and it just... I was like, no. This game was not fun enough to continue playing after all my save data is just gone for no reason.
Clearly you didn't mod the game with Save Game Plus.
On console, those saves were fairly large, and due to the cache system that those consoles used, like, having too many saves made your game run slower. So, you get fucked. Like, those games on consoles especially are just, like, they're not acceptable to me. They're not acceptable game experiences, yet they not only get a pass from a bunch of people, but a bunch of people love them. Like, very few things about games legitimately piss me off, but that's one of them.
Like they say, one man's trash is another man's treasure.
Yeah. Awesome.
Anyway, so I think we're moving on to underrated games now.
Yeah, let's try to make this a little more positive. Yeah, like positive. I think we try to be like fairly positive most of the time. So
you know what is one of the most underrated games for me is Super Hooked. It's the most innovative game of the year.
I don't know. Enough people like Super Hooked. I don't think it's underrated.
I wouldn't say it's underrated. Yeah, I haven't thought of it as being underrated.
One thing that I want
I feel like Super Hot is about exactly as rated as it should be.
One thing that I want to make a distinction about that was really difficult, and it was really difficult to find lists of underrated games that were like most of the lists I found when I typed in underrated video games on Google were like overlooked games. And now, underrated and overlooked are similar, but they're not. And a lot of them were extremely temporal. A lot of them were from last year, or the year before. It was very difficult. Like, I couldn't really find a lot of people talking about underrated games from the past, even more so than overrated games. At least with overrated, people, like, shit on Final Fantasy VII all the time, so they had that to talk about. So, one game... We already mentioned Mirror's Edge, which showed up on the most for underrated. The second most that I found was Titanfall. And I haven't played Titanfall, but I feel like this is a game that everybody that played it loves it, thinks it's one of the best shooter franchises ever. The campaign in Titanfall 2 I've heard only incredible things about, but EA decided to be EA, and they decided to keep releasing this game alongside Call of Duty. Guess what's going to happen to your incredibly innovative first-person shooter if you release it against Call of Duty? You're going to fail. I don't care who you are.
Wait, were they releasing it at the same time?
Yes! They released it at the same time as Battlefield and Call of Duty. They also make Battlefield!
Why?
That's the fucking crazy thing! Just wait 6 months! Yes, don't force your game to come on fucking holidays.
They threw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, and like the Titanfall game,
some manager at EA's like, we gotta get all the games released on this day.
yeah, but like the Titanfall games, they're made by Respawn Entertainment, which was founded by ex-Infinity Ward people. Infinity Ward being one of the old Call of Duty studios, and thank goodness that Respawn made Apex Legends and that's successful, because that I don't know if I cannot say whether or not I don't know whether or not they were in a hole at EA from the non-success of the Titanfall games, but I'm very thankful that Apex did well, because they're doing very good work.
I swear I heard a rumor actually that Apex was basically a derivative from Titanfall.
It's set in the same universe.
Oh,
yeah. You know what's funny is
like they were working on it as a mode originally that was going to be. Oh, I guess it basically is if it's in the same universe.
Yeah.
For a while after playing Titanfall 2, I was so hyped from the campaign that I started trying to do cheap voice imitations of one of the main characters, BT, and a few people picked up on what was going on and started being like, "Is that BT?" And of course, I would respond in the cheesiest voice possible. So, you can definitely tell who on Apex has played Titanfall 2. What's interesting is how smoothly they've taken the franchise, what a lot of the innovative concepts out of Titanfall 2 and put it into Apex Legends, while also, I think one of the things about Titanfall 2 that made it, I think, besides being released at terrible timing, that made it not hit the market as well as it could have, was I don't think they appropriately directed their marketing engine towards it like they could have.
Yeah, that's 100% it. Like, again, don't put out. You're just flooding the market at that point. Nobody's going to be happy if you do that.
Perhaps it was their sacrificial lamb.
I
The
don't
strategy all along.
It's a bad strategy.
Truly.
But another game that I saw on quite a few lists that I mean to play but haven't gone around to yet is Sleeping Dogs. And it's a GTA game that's more GTA than GTA. it's the GTA game that the people that didn't like GTA 4 probably wanted, where it's a Hong Kong like hard-boiled undercover detective story.
Okay, yeah, because when you say the GTA's GTA game, my mind goes to what is the super over the top GTA clone? Purple. Everything was purple in it.
Oh, Saints Row.
Saints Row. Yeah, that's the one. I guess that's the that's GTA San Andreas. GTA San Andreas, or something. I don't know. I don't even know. I haven't really played
Saints Row took a turn for the crazy around 3. It was actually trying to be like a little bit more serious, grounded GTA clone in the first 2 installments, but then they jumped out of a plane blasting Kanye and everything changed.
Yeah.
But yeah,
anyway, yeah, Sleeping Dogs. I remember when it came out, it looked really cool, but
nobody bought it.
nobody bought it.
Yeah. So yeah, that looks really cool. Maybe I'll play that and talk about it later. So I mentioned that Halo showed up on a fair amount of overrated lists, but one game that showed up on a fair amount of the underrated list was Halo 3 ODST.
I would agree. That is definitely an underrated game. It was very enjoyable.
Yeah, like Well, it introduced the firefight mode, which it's quote unquote the horde mode, derivative of Gears of War horde mode. Who cares? It's that concept was still new at the time, and that was super fun. And it didn't have competitive multiplayer in it because you were supposed to play Halo 3 for that. But the campaign for it was really interesting for a Halo game, where you had this city at night that you were going through to the different instanced missions that you were going on, and you would have combat encounters while you were moving around this city, and there were some collectibles to find, and the soundtrack for ODST actually is really cool in that section, where it's all this cool jazz shit. Yeah. I love cool jazz shit. So yeah, it has some pretty novel ideas for a Halo game that it was really cool to see a AAA game takes a little bit of a detour there. It's not the most groundbreaking game or anything, but it was definitely a cool one. And one more that I saw on a lot of lists was No Man's Sky.
Underrated?
Yeah, and well, I think the reason for that is when it came out, it was a huge disappointment for a lot of people because it had the opposite problem of Titanfall, where the marketing made it seem like way more than it actually was.
Yeah.
But apparently they've kept updating it and really kept it going, and that today it's probably an underrated game just because of the
initial impressions were so bad.
The first impressions make or break a deal for a lot of people, and so if you completely wrote off No Man's Sky when it first came out, and you still own it, maybe now's a good time to check back in and see how it is.
I think a lot of I remember a friend of mine played a lot of No Man's Sky, and he liked it, but also the game was buggy as shit. He was always complaining about bugs. Crashed a lot. Not just we're talking hard crashes. Frequent hard crashes. That's not good.
Yeah.
And then that on top of the content that they promised that wasn't in the initial release, I can see how a lot of people were pretty choked.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. Yeah, but it was much harder to find a consensus on underrated games. A lot of the writing that people had for underrated mostly was just here's a somewhat here's just an indie game that I love. And it's well, I mean, yeah, sure, the more people should have played this argument for underrated is a decent one, but when I think underrated, I think more of games that people know of, games that people that rose to a certain standard of people should know about this, for example. Nobody's played every indie game that shows up on Steam and itch these days, even if they're amazing. So saying that's underrated, I'd say that's maybe overlooked. I think those are distinctive enough. I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough because, especially, you're talking about the fact that a lot of the chatter around this stuff is around more recent releases, and I think it gets really challenging because when you're looking at older games and you're deep into sort of back catalogs of games that might not even be easy to get a hold of anymore, you're running into this issue where a lot of people, it's if it was forgotten, honestly, a lot of the time it probably was forgotten for a reason. It's why is every game from the SNES era, so amazing? It's well, no, they weren't. No one talks about the SNES games that were bad.
Let me tell you, when in the olden days, there were way more shitty licensed games.
Oh, yeah.
So many shitty licensed games that were just these, not thought out platformers, or in the amount of, Gradius and R-Type clones that were, these side-scrolling shooters that were just nothing. Yeah, sure.
One game I do want to plug here, as I'm not sure whether we would call it underrated or overlooked, but Wipeout Wipeout series, Wipeout HD in particular, on the PS3, which is now an old system.
My God.
But I think it hasn't. I don't think there's been any installments in the series since Wipeout HD, which is probably why it hasn't been, at least not that I'm aware of.
I'd be curious about any PSP or Vita releases, but I don't know about consoles.
No one bought those anyway.
Fair point. People bought the PSP. Nobody bought the Vita.
Yeah, but Wipeout HD is just like a super, super solid. I don't even know what the name of the genre would be, but like a futuristic hover racer,
An F-Zero like.
an F-Zero like, yes.
Aha.
But Wipeout HD is just, it's a really, really bumpin' racing game. It's got like the music, the whole aesthetic of the game is perfect. Like just straight up, it is exactly like what high-speed anti-gravity future racing should look like. It's a bit more serious than F-Zero, which, I mean, some people might consider that, I don't know, however you feel about that, but like, I think it nails the aesthetic perfectly. They got a great soundtrack for it. They got really, really tight controls, which is paramount in any racing game. You have to have good controls. And it's just, it's a really great racing game, but I feel the genre of a whole of these high-speed anti-gravity racers is sort of not as popular these days.
Yeah.
It's gone from Audio Surf to
Audio Surf was a puzzle game.
to Beat Saber.
Both of those are rhythm games.
Yeah. Yeah, the rhythm game. Yeah. Neither of them are racing games. But yeah, I love Wipeout. In fact, I was actually just playing it like maybe a month ago.
Nice.
Because I was like, I just had that. I had the itch for a racing game. I'm like, you know what? Wipeout HD with the Fury expansion. But you know, the funny thing too is that it's with Wipeout HD. The game is actually, for what it is, it's basically perfect. Like, I don't think there's anything you can actually do to improve that game. There are certain, like, you could put more tracks into it, I guess. But, like, there's no way you make that game better without dramatically changing what the game actually is. In its niche, it pretty much nailed it. Like, there's not much more you can do with it. So I think that's it, which is a blessing and a curse, because it means that you
nailed it in one.
Yeah, you have. Well, it was not the only Wipeout game. There were some Wipeout games earlier than that, but it pretty much, like, they refined the formula until it was so good that apparently they just were like, nah, that's it, no more sequels.
Yeah, and then I'll hide out.
And since it was in HD, it still holds up graphically.
4K remastered. Let's go.
4K.
Under 20 hertz.
Actually, the game probably would look really good if they bumped up the frame rate, just because it's a very fast racer. Like, especially on the high difficulties, the game's hard to play. Like, it's hard to actually even just pay attention. The only way to play the game on high difficulties is to just have all the maps memorized. Mm-hmm. That's the only way.
So, in terms of, like, other underrated games that I know of, like, I've played my fair share of somewhat obscure Japanese RPGs and strategy games, but I find it difficult to call any of them underrated. Like, more people should know about Ogre Battle, I think, but it's difficult for me to say it's underrated when nobody's rating it.
Yeah.
But the one big example that I want to say here, and I'll probably just leave it at that, is you played Freedom Fighters. This was a PS2 game, yes. I believe.
Yes, this is the
IO
one with
Interactive.
It's got squad combat.
Oh,
right?
hell yeah! It's got
okay,
squad
yeah.
combat,
I just want to make sure. I just want to make sure there's another game with a very similar title that is a total piece of trash.
Are you talking about Freedom Force?
Yes.
That's a beat 'em up.
Yes. Freedom Force is a piece of garbage. I hate that game.
I liked it at the time because I was young. But I was young and never got to play any of the like SNES or arcade beat 'em ups.
I think I got confused, I got confused, I think, and bought and downloaded Freedom Force. And then I was like, this is not the game I wanted. Oh no, this game is awful. But yeah, Freedom Fighters is an amazing game.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting, yeah.
It's a game that not a lot of people talk about, and
a lot of people played it.
I'm not even talking much about the campaign because I never really figured out the campaign and kept dying. But I played so much of the split screen multiplayer in that game, and it was sick. It had a capture the flag mode that, because of the squad mechanics that you had in it, was amazing. You would direct your squad around this map and try and outmaneuver the other person you're playing as to capture this flag. I played hours and hours and hours of this thing, and I never hear any. I have heard people talk about Freedom Fighters in a kind of an underrated context, but I never hear anybody talk about the multiplayer, and that saddens me so much.
Yeah, the thing about Freedom Fighters that I still don't understand is that I swear it did squad-based direction so well, and it's almost like it's never been done that well in any other game with squad mechanics I've played, which is weird because the game's pretty old now.
Yeah.
But there's some newer games that have squad mechanics that just don't work, and I'm like, why don't you work? There's a functioning example here of a great game with functional squad mechanics that are well executed. Why can't people? But I guess that's one of those things. It's the programming's difficult with that, and that's the part that trips up devs.
I don't even think the programming is the difficult part. I just think the raw design is.
Yeah.
Because if you have a game with squad mechanics, you really need to figure out the correct balance between the squad doing too much versus not enough. Having it be just right. Because if you make the squad do too much, I've heard Ghost Recon Wildlands has this problem where the squad will just clear out all the encounters for you. You're barely playing the game. Or if you have the squad not do enough, then why do you put it in the game?
Yeah.
Like a lot of times the AI people you have running around with you in something like a Gears of War feel like they're not doing anything.
Yeah.
A lot of the time. So I think it's more of a difficult balance to solve that than a programming.
Yeah. Okay,
headache.
I see what you're.
I've definitely played Ghost Recon and experienced exactly what you were talking about, where I was like, this encounter is difficult. Squad mates, descend, and the mission would be over.
Yeah.
So, any other examples of games you feel are underrated?
I mean, there's definitely some indie games that I love. But I think it's not that they're underrated. It's just that no one knows about them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I still love to hear at least the titles. Maybe not to go so in deep.
That could be. Yeah. Actually, wouldn't mind. That could be a good future episode. But
okay. Let's go.
Actually, just to rattle off a couple titles. Lyle and Cube Sector.
Never heard of it.
It's great. It's really good. It's kind of like a Metroidvania-ish.
Sean just brought up a game on Steam, and that game's awesome.
Oh, DEF CON is amazing. I love DEF CON.
I just want... Does DEF CON have a screensaver mode? That's mostly what I want from DEF CON.
I think it actually does.
Okay, I might go buy it.
One of the most astounding things that I found about DEF CON is that when I was first learning how to play DEF CON, I went to their official game guide, which is an actual instruction booklet on how to survive a nuclear strike. They went all out. Not only did they teach you how to play the game, but they had actual tips about how to survive an actual nuclear strike.
That's hilarious.
The most I've done with DEF CON is I've watched a couple videos of people playing it, which, because of just how the game works, were kind of just more like podcasts. with a cool visual thing in the background.
Especially depending on the game speed that they're playing at.
They were playing on fucking slow.
Yeah, well, yeah, because DEF CON has real time mode.
They have work mode.
Yeah.
They were playing that slow, but it was still pretty freaking crazy.
Yeah, work mode lasts exactly 6 hours and is in real time.
Yeah,
and has a keyboard shortcut to clip to desktop. I would definitely put DEF CON right there on the list. I actually think it might be worthy of a valid future playthrough for us, for our group here.
Oh my god. Alright.
Yeah. There's my 2 cents.
Yeah, DEF CON's good. I'm
Yeah,
not sure. I don't think DEF CON...
Let's think about more content ideas that involve us playing an extremely slow game and wondering if we should put up the video without cutting out the dead air.
You know what is the other interesting mode that seemed entertaining to me is their what I'll call shotgun mode, which is where the game takes place over 15 minutes and you have barely any time to think about anything and things happen way too fast. And that sounds pretty great to me too.
Alright, cool.
Yeah, DEF CON's definitely a great game. I think it's just maybe people don't talk about it as much because it's a bit older now.
And it's definitely it's out there.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a bit weird, I suppose.
It's not a game that you can put in front of somebody and say, play this, and I think maybe 10% of the time you might get the person on the other end saying it was a fun experience, at best.
And maybe 20% of the time they'll tell you that it was a profound experience for them.
I mean, one of the things about DEF CON is that, I can't remember if we've talked about this, but in terms of strategy games, every single strategy game, whether that has custom map creation, whether it's an RTS, turn-based strategy, multiplayer, anything with a campaign editor, anything whatsoever that has map editing, I guarantee you someone somewhere is going to make a map of the Earth in your game to compete on. And it will be a terrible map. Because as it turns out, just a territorial map of Earth is actually it's a very unbalanced map to play almost any strategy game on.
Just like real life.
Yeah, but DEF CON, as a game simulating nuclear war on the Earth, you can only play on a map of the Earth. Yeah. And so it is structurally locked in to a terrible strategic map that is not necessarily a good design for balance or fun. But
it works.
It works, and that's
so
the
well.
game. And DEF CON's, that's part of the joy of DEF CON. Also, I think you usually, at least when I played, randomize who gets what countries.
Yeah.
Any other underrated games?
That's it for me.
I'm sure there's many
that I can think of.
All right. So the last thing we brought up was guilty pleasures. Now this is, an overrated game is a game that people love but isn't great. An underrated game is a game that's great that people don't necessarily know about. A guilty pleasure is a game that when you're playing it has some flaws, maybe even some critical flaws, but you still enjoy it for one reason or another, despite itself. And for me, one of the things that emphasizes this the most is shitty mobile gacha games. I love the gacha mechanic, and it's a real shame that every single game that has this mechanic is done in a way to try and print themselves money. Now, for the uninitiated, a gacha mechanic is where you basically roll a die to get some kind of content. Usually a character, or maybe like a skill or equipment that you can equip. Basically, it's complete random chance stuff. Think of it like a loot system in a real, quote-unquote, real video game, but, maybe you want to pay for it. Like loot boxes. And
I love gambling where I don't win real money.
I mean, if I wasn't raised in a way that made me think, oh god, I never want to spend any money ever, I would probably have a horrible gambling problem. I play so much goddamn Magic the Gathering. I like these mobile games. I love random chance. And, yeah, and a lot of these gacha games, also appeal to another side of me, which is I really like the theory behind, team composition. Getting all these different characters with all these different abilities and mixing and matching them in ways that can overcome an obstacle. Now, that's really fun to me, But so many of these gacha games, like, I play them, I bounce off of them because, they're so pay to win. You need to spend money to acquire a vast and powerful set of characters to actually do this in. Like, I've tried Raid's Shadow Legends. That game that every fucking YouTuber and Twitch person is being paid to try and peddle to people. That's a pretty shitty game.
I wasn't even sure if it was a real game. It's not a game, it's just ads, right?
Fuck, man, yeah. Like, it's already a problem that everybody was advertising it to people in the first place, but then you get into the game and it's constantly popping up like, special offer, pay to get this shit that doesn't matter. And yeah, so there's 3 mobile games that I've sunk a fair amount of time into, and that's Fire Emblem Heroes, blank on the name, Final Fantasy Brave Exvius or something, more of the whatever the hell. It's basically, they made a Final Fantasy Tactics gacha game.
Oh my god.
What?
Yeah, and it's terrible, and it eats me up inside. And the current one I'm playing is AFK Arena, and that was actually not that bad. It's still, because it's more laid back, it's basically like you're not meant to storm through it, you're meant to slowly gain resources, and you pay money. Obviously, you can pay money to speed that up, but you can just slowly gain stuff, and it's fine. So yeah, one of the main problems with these games is power creep, and if you're trying to make people spend money on your game, clearly the new stuff that you release has to be better than the old stuff. This was the main problem with Fire Emblem Heroes. I played that game for like 3 years straight. Checking in on it every day, doing dailies, summoning new characters. I sort of loved the Fire Emblem franchise. So that was super cool, but eventually it got to the point where every new unit that released was so much better than the old stuff that it became so transparent that the power creep became so transparent that it just wasn't fun anymore. Final Fantasy Tactics game was so blatantly pay to win, and B, FOMO, to where there was so much limited stuff that it was crap. And yeah, but I still enjoy playing these games. I still love rolling and seeing what I get. And every time I start a new one, it's a pretty fresh experience for a little bit, to where I don't know what I'm gonna get. I'm discovering the mechanics, discovering cool team comps, run into some dumb barrier, and then quit and move on to the next one. So that's definitely like an entire class of guilty pleasure games for me. I know the two of you actually have good taste, so I don't know if you guys got any guilty pleasure games, but I'd love to hear it.
There's a few games I can think of over the years I've played that were bad games that for some reason I kept going back to. One of those games was an N64 game called Buck Bumble.
Oh my god! Hell yeah, Buck Bumble.
Now,
Buck Bumble's a shit game.
Buck Bumble's a terrible game.
But the theme song
is
so good.
The theme song is still stuck in my head. But yeah, like, I don't know why I kept playing the game. It was, like, the controls were bad. The draw distance was bad.
It was an N64 game. Of course the draw distance was bad.
It was bad even for N64. The textures were
non-existent.
It just had graphical problems constantly, I swear.
Sean, you need to look up and listen to the Buck Bumble theme song.
Alright.
Yeah, so...
We need a reaction right here.
Buck Bumble theme song. Here we go. First an ad. I'm going to mute the ad.
Is it for honey?
No. Banking. Wow.
It's just this like
London grime artiste, like crazy shit. It's so good.
Yeah.
You've heard of drum and bass. What about drum and bees?
Drum and bees.
I'm digging it. That is so
It's
cool.
nonsense. I love it.
Yeah, it's got a nonsense but like very catchy main theme. And yeah, the game itself is like this kind of weird flying action shooter thing. You fly around, you're a bee. It's not good. Like I said, it's a bad game. But I played it so much for some reason. Could be that theme.
Cool.
Another game I played a weirdly lot of Frogger.
Okay.
Not the Frogger you're thinking of.
Oh no.
The 3D Frogger.
Oh no.
Oh god.
Again, it's a bad game. It's not good. The controls are weird. It's buggy. You'll just die sometimes for no reason because the collision, the hit detection is awful. It was just poorly made. And it's also like not even, I don't know, it's just weirdly not fun. So why did I play it, you ask? I have no idea. Yeah, there were a lot of weird like 3D versions of older games that like Hasbro in particular was making. Like they also made a 3D Centipede game.
Oh no.
Which also was not a particular. It was also not a good game. It was also a bad. Yeah. Played a few of those. So yeah, weird Hasbro games that were 3D interpretations of some more classic 2D arcade games. They made a lot of them weirdly, but they were pretty much all terrible. I played too many of them. You can have fun with anything, folks. That's the lesson here.
Yeah. You can even have fun with yourself if you try hard enough.
So for me, guilty pleasure games, there's... You know what? I will say that a lot of the games that I classify as guilty pleasures, I would actually not say are bad. They're just bad for me in the sense that they engage that part of my brain that wants to beat the system, but the system requires an incredible time sink of developing skills in. One of those guilty pleasures for me would definitely be Magic the Gathering.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I can sink a lot of time and energy and money into getting better at Magic, and I will plod along at what feels like a snail's pace at slowly getting better at it, all the while watching my time, energy, and money flying out of my wallet, mind, and soul. Now, I genuinely enjoy this, and so it very much is a guilty pleasure, because often I'll look at the time and go, oh my god, or I'll look at my spending habits and go, oh my god, or I will feel like throwing my keyboard around and go, oh my fucking god, and yet I come back to this game all the time and go, and I just want more.
Yeah, Magic's one of the most addicting games ever made. And it is definitely a problem. I've also had instances where I'm like, I need to stop for a bit.
Yes.
But here's the thing, it's always I need to stop for a bit. It's never I need to stop for good. Because I always want to come back to it.
Now, you've heard me talk plenty of awesome things about this game, but I will definitely say it's also on my guilty pleasures list, is Noita and games like it. Where it's completely open world. The objective, beating the game is obtusely hard. And the thing that I enjoy most about Noita is the spectacular deaths that I have and not actually trying to beat it. However, I find that it's the instant gratification of starting again is like, you know, when you hear about those hamsters, you know, pushing the button for more treats until the treat machine runs out or their hamstery little fingers go numb to the bone.
Skinner box. Skinner
yes.
box.
Noita is definitely my Skinner box. I will happily die 1,000 deaths just to see the extraordinary ways that I die, and yet I am dissatisfied because I have not beat the game yet, which is like some sort of Sisyphean task, in which getting run over by the boulder that you're rolling up the hill seems to be the most horrifying and yet most pleasurable part of the journey. However, every time I play that game, I learn something about the physics or just general survival tactics that makes me a little bit better at the game, and that progress makes me truly believe that one day I'll finally beat it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would definitely put Noita in my guilty pleasures list. Countless hours of sleep have been lost to it. And I can imagine many more. I'm just very happy that it's not a paid DLC game or paid of any kind.
Imagine if you had to throw in $1 every time you wanted to start a run.
If Noita was an arcade game, I have a feeling that the coffers would be overflowing.
I mean, putting a roguelike in an arcade would be actually...
That's genius.
Like, that would be genius.
Yeah.
It's funny. So, yeah, so you're using a bit of a different definition of guilty pleasure here. I think by that definition, Civilization would probably fit. I will waste. I had to stop.
We need to save the Civ talk for another time.
Civ is its own feature. We've all been there.
Just like Civ itself, it's going to take a while.
It's going to take a while. Yeah.
I think XCOM might even fit into that one as well.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
For a future cast.
I might be off. I start playing XCOM again. I might be off XCOM. I had some bad times. Talk about some other time. It was that bad. Cool. Yeah, there's a couple more guilty pleasure games that I have. One of which is guilty. I'll call it guilty by association, and its association is it's a NES game, so it's gonna be rough. But Faxanadu. I played so much of this game as a kid, and this nostalgia still hits me when I go back to it, despite the fact that it's fucking hard as balls and obscure as hell. It doesn't make any sense, but it's still like got a couple really neat ideas to it. And actually, I want to make a video and show you to this game because I don't think either of you've heard of it.
Cool. All right, I'm looking forward to that.
Cool. And the biggest guilty pleasure game for me is Final Fantasy 13. I fully realize that this game is not a good game. The pacing is abysmal. The story is stupid. The character progression is nothing. It's just a line. You can go off the line at certain points, but it's just one node and then you're back on the line. And there's like weapon upgrades that don't barely matter. I mean, they matter for your stats, I suppose, but how you upgrade them doesn't. And it's got so many huge problems with it. And I totally understand why people say that it's like the worst Final Fantasy or whatever. But I still finished that game. And I have not finished other Final Fantasy games that I think are better. Like, I haven't finished Final Fantasy 9. That's definitely a better game than 13. But 13 has a couple things going for it. Lightning is maybe one of my favorite Final Fantasy characters in the entire series. A lot of people don't like her, but I like the fact that she is just over it. She is so done with everything that's happening. And having that kind of just like almost realist perspective in a fucking Final Fantasy game is mind-blowing. Like, that's not something that you see in any of the other games, and I thought that it was awesome. Number 2 is the combat. I thought the combat in the game was really fun, even though it was incredibly mindless. And I prefer the term streamlined, to where you are controlling a single character instead of a party. You are not selecting your moves from a big grid of big menus of turn-based stuff. Instead, you're just mashing X. That's all you do. Just mash X. And it auto-battles for you. And the only other thing that you do is use items when things get rough. Use a couple special abilities when things get rough. And switch your party's roles. It's a very interesting take on turn-based battling, because a lot of the time, like, I play a ton of RPGs. I'm not going to kid myself. Turn-based menu-based combat is a lot of the times fucking stupid. Because all you're doing is figuring out the opponent's weakness and then going to the menu option that exploits it. So the fact that it does it automatically for you, after you fight an enemy enough times, or if you specifically choose specific things to try them out, or you use a skill that reveals enemies' weaknesses. It'll just do all that for you. It streamlines it in a way that it just cuts out the busy work. Because guess what? If you're going in an area and you're going to fight the same enemy 10 different times in that area, you're going to figure it out after the first couple fights and then just do the same thing over and over again for the rest. Right? So I think that it's actually streamlined and cool. And the third thing that I love about it is it's a spectacle game, first and foremost. And that's why the battles being super streamlined helps, because it gives you the opportunity to watch these battles and all the crazy effects that are happening and all the crazy jumping around and sword slashes and all that stuff. It's just cool to look at. And the cutscenes, as is standard with, these Square RPGs, are absolutely gorgeous. And it's one of like the very few games that I looked at and thought, wow, graphics. To where like this is, an accomplishment above anything I've seen before. So it's weird for me, being such a gameplay focused person, to mostly love a game because of its graphics, but Final Fantasy 13 is that for me.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, concerns, ideas, jokes?
You know what's funny?
One
actually?
jokes.
The way you were just talking about the auto battler making it so you're just doing the same thing over and over, it just made me think of RuneScape.
Yep.
Or Loop Hero.
I'm gonna chop a tree for hours, just get my wood chopping skill
Oh
up,
my God,
and that's not gonna do anything for me.
It'll help you chop the trees down faster.
It'll make it so I'm able to chop down like these special trees that are in an area that I'll never see because I'm not a subscriber.
Yeah, RuneScape is. Looking back, I can't believe I spent any time at all in RuneScape, because
I'll call RuneScape an overrated game. I don't give a fuck.
It's the worst MMO I've ever played. Not that I've played.
The
a lot
developers were even trying to
not played
warn
enough
you
Korean
about
MMOs, my
their
friend.
game. They named their game Run, Escape.
That when I first discovered RuneScape was at the fucking George Mackey Library. When I saw a couple people playing it, I saw the same thing was happening on both their screens. They were moving around the same place, and it was the first example of a multiplayer online game I've ever seen.
And it was in a browser.
Yeah, so that blew my goddamn mind. So I would constantly ask to go to the library to, play that and Neopets.
Neopets. Yeah.
But yeah, and when I discovered RuneScape, I would tell people about it, like, oh, what's it called? RuneScape. Just remember, run, escape.
Yes.
Yeah.
And later, O-Game.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah, all
no.
these browser-based
Oh, no.
games are basically guilty pleasures. I
Yes.
can't think of any browser-based game I've played. Well, okay, maybe some Flash games, but a lot of these browser-based games that you pay money for are actually just bad. Browser-based games that are free, those can be good.
Oh, yeah.
Perhaps. But we'll browse that topic another day.
Yeah.
As for today, I think...
Difficult to browse with Flash Player being gone and all.
RIP.
We loved you so.
Killed by security violations.
Yep. All right. Well, we hope you enjoyed this foray of
This hot episode.
these hot
episodes.
takes. Yeah.
As always, leave a comment at angrysunzone@outlook.com. I'd love to read some emails from people about their overrated, underrated games, and if they agree or disagree with what we got, instead of the constant barrage of spam mail that account gets. Oh, dear Lord.
If you would prefer, we're also on Twitter. We have a Twitter account. You can tweet your angry comments at us about how you love Oblivion, and Oblivion's your favorite game ever, and how dare you talk down about any Bethesda game, because Bethesda's amazing.
Yeah. At Angry Sunzone on Twitter. Like, think about this. Where on the internet are you going to find people asking to hear your hot takes on how we suck and how you think we're wrong? We do. We want to hear that shit.
And we'll talk about it. You can become famous.
Yeah, we'll totally read that shit on the air.
We'll immortalize you.
Yeah, and check out our YouTube channel, Angry Sunzone.
I
like
believe
the
it.
rest.
I believe it has content now.
Yes, we finally put up a video. We put up our reaction to the Nintendo E3 Direct. So
Yes,
the reason why we didn't talk about any of that is because we talked about it there. So go watch our multimedia strategy.
Yeah, we have more videos in the pipeline that may or may not be released.
Yeah.
You'll find out by subscribing to YouTube.
Yeah. Ring the bell. Don't ring the bell. You don't need more notifications in your life.
Or subscribe just to this. That's good.
Oh, yeah. Subscribing's fine.
Just subscribe to anything with our name on it. You'll be good.
Yeah.
And as always,
You messed it up.
Oh man, are you gonna start playing the freaking Buck Bumble theme song?
Oh.
With air horns over it?
oh yes.
Buck Bumble Trap Remix.
On about now, it's time to rock with the biggity buck. On about now, it's time to rock with the biggity buck.
Ha 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 ha.